Hey, SPC-205. Sorry, I should have held off and pushed the button a second later and had my coffee first. Hey, this is our last video of the semester. Happy to say, or maybe some of y'all are happy to say, this is our final exam review. And after this, I will not be posting any more videos for you guys. If you guys want to, you can go back and watch the old lectures. They're still going to be on YouTube. If you do that, don't tell me. It's a little creepy. But hey, this is it. Let me tell you what I do for my final exam reviews. I do those on video, even if I'm have in-class classes, so you're not missing anything. I have here my lecture notes, and I will be going over things that I feel I will be drawing test questions from. Okay, I have a bank of old test questions that I draw from, that I update, that I change a little bit. I write new questions every semester. And these are the things that I feel I may be asking you questions from. Now, all the questions I'm going to ask you on the final will be covered here, okay? Just to let you guys know. But not everything I cover here will be a test question. Also, there's stuff I pointed to you guys and you need to look at in the book, okay? I may make a brief mention of those here, but if I told you to go look at it in the book, you should have gone and looked at it in the book, okay? All right, so now the other thing is, due to how screwed up everything is right now, I'm not I tried to get these in as close to the order as I could, but as you guys know, I combined a couple of lectures with 205 and 209, so these may not go in the exact order. I will try to pause at the beginning of each when I introduce a new lecture and a new topic so that you can hit pause and then go find your notes for that and then just highlight your notes as you go through. Okay? Let's get started. Lecture number 1 was a joint lecture between 209 and 205. It was the communications process and the communications basic. We defined communication. Then we talked about the human communication process. We talked about the components of human communication. 2, knowing participants, message, channels, feedback. We talked about forms of communication. We talked about intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication, group communication, public communication, and mass communication. We talked about a whole bunch of models. We talked about Aristotle and Laswell and how close they were to each other. We talked about encoding and decoding. We talked about the linear model from Shannon and Weaver. We talked about the ABX model from Newcomb. We talked about the interactional model from Osgood-Schramm. We talked about Barnland's transactional model. Then we talked about my favorite, Dance's helix model. Okay. Then we talked about a dialogic theory, which involved mutuality, propinquity, empathy, risk, and commitment. Okay. Then we talked about communication competence and how we achieve that through adaptability, appropriateness, and effectiveness. And then we talked about communication as a process, not an event. Okay. Our next lecture was ethics in communication, or ethics in public speaking. Okay. We talked about the few key ideas in ethics: intent, means, and the ends. All right. We talked about ethical models like ends justifies the means, situational ethics, credibility-centered ethics. Then we talked about Aristotle saying, that your ability to persuade was built on your ethos or your personal credibility. And we talked about and that credibility-centered ethics was built on that concept of ethos. And remember, we also talked about pathos and logos. Okay. Now, this is out of order, but it was, again, another joint one with communications and culture. Okay? So hit pause and find your notes for communications and culture. Okay, we're going to move forward. We talked about the layers of culture: national, regional, gender, generational, social class, and corporate. I have a lot of people miss a lot of questions there. You really need to go over those and make sure you know all those different layers of culture. We develop a sense of who we are from our engagement with our culture. Even if it's in the act of rejecting that culture, we define ourselves as being apart from that. Okay? And we talked about our identities, personal, social, and cultural. Okay? Then we talked about some specific cultural identities. Race, gender, and sexuality. We talked about the fact that all of those are not fixed. They all change as to how we define a race, how we define a gender, whether or not your sexuality is acceptable is defined by the culture, not by any biological definition. Race is not defined by biologics. Okay. Then we talked about intercultural communication, and we talked about cultural appropriation. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is performance apprehension and developing confidence. Take a moment. Okay, so performance apprehension. We talked about some myths of performance apprehension. We talked about some causes, biological, previous experiences, levels of skill. We talked about ways to deal with it. We talked about a communications versus a performance frame of mind, relaxation, cognitive restructuring, audience analysis, keeping your organization simple. And then I showed the stages of performance apprehension. Okay? Stages of performance apprehension, that could be important on the test. Then we talked about choosing your topic. Choosing your topic, we hit the 3 things you need to take into consideration when choosing your topic: the speaker, the occasion, and the audience. We talked about picking the purpose for your speech, and your speech could have one of 3 general purposes: to inform, to entertain, and to persuade. And then we talked about how to find a specific purpose. Okay? So you may see a sample where it shows, hey, here's the topic, here's the general purpose. What might your specific purpose be? Okay? Chapter 5, the audience. Okay. That's going to really wear on you people, I know. We talked about Tip O'Neill, who said in America all politics are local, and how that applied to public speaking. We talked about initial audience dispositions. We talked about creating ethos, back to Aristotle. We talked about audience analysis and methods of analysis like demographic, purpose-oriented, and some others. We talked about sources of data for audience analysis, and then we talked about adaptation. Okay? And this is out of order. I know, I just realized that, but it got stuck on the back of the audience analysis. Nonverbal communication. And this includes, we talked about what it included. It basically is everything that's not the words you choose, but it does include how you choose to say those words. So there's facial expressions, gestures, paralinguistics, which separates vocal from verbal, posture and mimics, proxemics, eye contact, haptics or touching, and clothing. That even counts. Okay? We told you to be conversational, be animated, and act like you care. All right. We talked about the voice. We talked about the characteristics of the voice: pitch, volume, and rate. We talked about vocalized pauses. We talked about eye contact. We talked about posture. And we talked about movement. And we said that all movement should be motivated. Okay? Chapter 7, organizing your speech. Okay, we talked about how to organize or structure your main points: chronological, narrative, topic, any logical reason, a spatial pattern, causal pattern, problem solution. Okay? Then we talked about the methods of presentation: extemporaneous, reading from a manuscript, speaking from memory, and impromptu speaking. Know the difference between reading from a manuscript and speaking from memory. They're not the same thing. Then we talked about outlining. And we said, why do we outline? Oh, okay, hold on a second. Then we talked about outlining. First of all, why do we outline? We stress that over and over again. And then we ran through some things about, testing. Besides visualizing the speech, you test the scope, you test the logical relationship of your main points, and then you get to test your supporting ideas. You can also test the balance and proportionality of the speech, and you can assist in developing your notes. Okay? Then we talked about speaking to inform. That's long enough. You guys can hit pause faster than that. An informative speech is simply to convey knowledge. We talked about why we do informative speaking. We talked about some key concepts like adjust your material to the audience, avoid jargon, limit the information you present, build on previous knowledge, be memorable, make it relevant, and be personal. We told you to, here's some, not going to talk about that. We're good. We talked about evidence. Chapter 6, evidence. Okay. We talked about when to use evidence, why to use evidence, what kind of evidence to use, like opinion, statistics. We talked about where to find evidence, and we talked about how to use it in the speech. Okay? Problem-solution speeches. And remember, a problem solution has 4 basic parts: cause, effect, practicality or viability, and efficacy. Problem has cause and effect has to prove significance, and the solution has to be viable. It has to be practical. You have to be able to do it, and then it has to be effective. It has to have efficacy. Then we move to persuasive speaking. We talked about the difference between coercion and persuasion. We mentioned that audience analysis is the most important in persuasive speaking, and why. We talked about some obstacles to persuasive speaking, like selective perception, selective recall, selective exposure, degree of commitment, public commitment. We talked about reasoning and fallacies. We talked about inductive reasoning, reasoning by analogy, and deductive reasoning, or inductive and deductive. We talked about some fallacies, like the hasty generalization, the false analogy, appealing to false authorities, the argument ad hominem, and the appeal to tradition. Okay? Then we talked about methods of changing attitude. We talked about like foot in the door, door in the face. And then we talked about what makes a good call to action. Simple, specific, and symbolic. Then we did listen. You got the, I shared with you the SPC-209 listening lecture. Okay? We defined, basically the most important thing is the difference between listening and hearing. Know that. Know the stages of the old-fashioned stages of listening: receiving, understanding, remembering, evaluating, and I don't like responding, so there's 4. And then we went over the Blaine-Goss model. I am a big fan of Blaine-Goss. Okay? Then we talked about noise and the different types of noise that can interfere with listening. And then we talked about some biases. Last thing, language. That was the lecture I posted yesterday. Okay? We talked about denotative and connotative meanings. Remember, denotative is from the dictionary. Connotative comes from the context. Okay? We talked about how a person's engagement with their environment will change the meaning of language. We said speak accurately. And we talked about hyperbole and things like that. Okay? And then on in chapter 13.1, there is a list of ways that spoken language differs from written language. Be familiar with that. I'm pretty sure I've got questions that I'm already decided to put in there. Okay? Then we said adapt, be adaptive, be professional, and be inclusive. And that is it. That is all of it. There will be an announcement coming out. Actually, there'll be a couple of announcements coming out. Your final exam will be on Blackboard. It will open, and I've already published the date. I don't have it right off the top of my head, but it will be open as of 9 a.m. It will remain open for 24 hours. Once you log in and start working on your exam, you will have 90 minutes to finish it, and you will not be able to go back and answer a question. Once you hit next, that question is gone. You can never see it again. So please be aware of that. I'm going to put out an announcement that has all that stuff. I'm also going to put out an announcement that has some technical things, system things you need to be aware of, like, try to use a hardwired computer that's directly plugged into the internet, not wireless. I know that very few of us have that option anymore, but still, I'll give you the most advantageous. Okay. If you don't log in and take the exam, well, that's pretty obvious what's going to happen there. Okay, and that is it. So I won't, you won't see any more of my lectures. You won't see any more of me. You will see some. I will get your grades out over the next, probably middle of next week, with your grades for your persuasive speech, and then I'll be posting your final grades usually within 48 hours after you finish up the final. Okay, that's it. So listen, just again, my relationship with you as students does not end when I post your final grades. If you have any questions, I've had multiple students come into me, say, hey, I got to do a presentation at work. Can I ask you some advice? And I'm more than happy to do that for you. Here's the thing, though. Please don't do what some of my students from my online classes have done. They see me down in the hub, and they come running up to me going, Mr. McGinnis, Mr. And I'm like, I've never seen this person before, and yet they're running at me screaming my name. It freaks me out just a little bit. So if you do see me, walk up to me and say, hey, Mr. McGinnis, I was in your online 205 class. And I'll go, oh, hey, how are you? Okay, that way you don't freak me out like I'm about to get assaulted or something. Okay, otherwise that is it. The only thing is, I will say, if you have any questions, contact me. That is, there will be, and you can contact me at any time in the future. There will be a 24-hour window when that final exam is open that I generally don't respond to student emails. Because, a lot of times I get, hey, Mr. McGinnis, when you said there are 3 main parts to the speech, the conclusion, what did you mean by that? Okay? You said there's one part of the speech that's always, well, yeah, guess what? That's on the final. So, but any other time other than that, I'll be happy to talk to you. Okay? So that is it. Study hard. Enjoy your summer if you're not taking classes in the summer. Otherwise, stay safe, and we will be in touch.